Timothy Keller is an author, speaker, preacher, and the founding pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. He's the author of several books, including The Reason for God, Belief in an Age of Skepticism, which he spoke at Google before about. That won awards from World Magazine, Christianity Today, and was number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction in 2008. So today, Tim will be talking about his book, The Meaning of Marriage. So please join me in welcoming Tim Keller.
Yes, I wrote this book, Meaning of Marriage, with my wife, Kathy, and so I'm going to try to convey not only, and I'm serious about this, not only the sort of things that I want to say today, but what she would want me to say too. I'm here to convey the basic points of the book. It's called The Meaning of Marriage. I'm actually here then to tell you something about the essence of marriage. What is the essence of marriage? I can't tell you how often I've actually heard people say this. I've heard people say it in one way or another in movies, television shows, or in person. They say, "I love you. Why do I need a piece of paper to tell you I love you?" The piece of paper, the marriage thing, it's legal. It's not the essence of marriage. The essence of marriage, in that view, is passion and feeling. That's the essence of marriage, not contracts and legal things. On the contrary, the Christian view of marriage is that the essence of marriage is a long-term binding commitment epitomized in a covenant or a legal contract. A long-term binding commitment is the essence of marriage, not the passion and feeling, because that comes and goes, and comes, and then goes, and then comes. The thing that actually is the essence of marriage is that long-term binding commitment through a covenant. And here's the reasons why that's so important. And I know this is counterintuitive to contemporary people. First of all, the legal covenant actually makes marriage more intimate, not less. You know, there's two basic kinds of relationships. I'm going to call them consumer and covenant. A consumer relationship is like the relationship you have with your local grocer. You have a relationship with the grocer as long as the grocer is giving you produce at good produce at a good cost. But if you find somebody who gives you much better produce at a much better cost, you're going to go to the other grocer. Why? Because your individual needs are more important than the relationship. In a consumer-vendor relationship, your needs are more important than the relationship. In a covenant relationship, let's give you another example, parent-child. You're raising a child, the child cries, the child's selfish, the child's ill-behaved, and you can't say, "I've had it," like you can with a grocer, and just leave the child on somebody else's doorstep. You'll go to jail. And the reason is, at least our understanding is, your relationship with your child is not a consumer-vendor relationship, it's a covenant relationship. Now, when you're dating somebody or seeing somebody or having a relationship with somebody, a romantic relationship, but you're not married, the other person could walk away any time. And therefore, you're essentially in a consumer relationship in spite of all the rhetoric. In other words, you're still basically in marketing and promoting yourself. You have to. You've got to literally put your best face on because that other person could walk. But when you get married and when you say, "I'm bound to you through thick and thin," and when you have that legal contract, it creates a cradle of security for your vulnerability. It makes it possible to say, "Here's who I am and here's what's wrong." It makes it possible for you to actually be more intimate, more yourself. Just a piece of paper. First of all, the piece of paper, which is the contract, creates intimacy. Secondly, the piece of paper creates stability. In the book, I give you some research that shows that when you ask people, are their marriages happy or unhappy, 2/3 of all marriages that say they're unhappy, if they don't break up, 5 years later say they're happy. 2/3. What is it that keeps you in there for the incredible reward of getting through hard times into something really great, a good marriage? The answer is it's that piece of paper. Remember Ulysses in the famous myth tied himself to the mast as he was going by the island of the Sirens. Why? Because he knew he was going to kind of go crazy for a while. But he also knew that he'd get over it, And he didn't want to wreck the ship while he was when he wasn't thinking straight. So he tied himself to his mast. To the mast. That's what a marriage covenant is. It ties you to the mast to get you through those times. In most cases, if you're able to stick with it, you get into something richer. It creates that stability. This is why W.H. Auden, no small intellect, says this about marriage. It's a fascinating quote. He says, "Like everything which is not the involuntary result of fleeting emotion, but rather the creation of time and will, any marriage, happy or unhappy, is infinitely more interesting than any romance, however passionate." That's an amazing statement. Any marriage, happy or unhappy, is infinitely more interesting than any romance, however passionate. Why? Because everything which is not the involuntary result of fleeting emotion, but the creation of time and will, is more interesting. So, that little piece of paper, the essence of marriage, the long-term binding commitment, it creates intimacy, it creates stability, it also creates freedom. Kierkegaard talked a lot about why a marriage covenant was important. He said, if you don't know the discipline of making a promise and saying, in marriage, your marriage vows are not, I love you, I feel wonderful toward you, I want to serve you, I want to please you. That's not what a marriage vow is. Listen to them. The marriage vow is, I promise to be faithful, be loving, be serving. I promise to be doing these things regardless of my feelings in the future. You're making a promise. And Kierkegaard actually says, if you don't know the discipline of making a promise and sticking with it, you are actually not a free person. You are actually enslaved to your impulses. You're slave to the moment. You're enslaved to the circumstances. You're enslaved to your feelings. Hannah Arendt, again, no minor intellect, says something about that when she says, without being bound to the fulfillment of our promises, we would never be able to keep our identities. We would be condemned to wander helplessly and without direction in the darkness of each person's lonely heart, caught in the contradictions and equivocalities of it. Lewis Smedes, much less well known, but a sort of a Dutch-American philosopher, writes this about marriage promises. He says, when I make a promise, I bear witness that my future with you is not locked into a bionic beam with which I was stuck through the fateful combinations of X's and Y's in the hand I was dealt with out of my parents' genetic deck. Next sentence is better. When I make a promise, I testify that I was not routed along some unalterable itinerary by the psychic conditioning visited on me by my slightly wacky parents. When I make a promise, I declare that my future with people who depend on me is not predetermined by the mixed-up culture of my tender years. I am not fated, I am not determined, I am not a lump of human dough whipped into shape by the contingent reinforcement and aversive conditioning of my past. I know as well as the next person I cannot create my life de novo. I am well aware that much of what I am and what I do is a gift or a curse from my past, but when I make a promise to anyone, I rise above all the conditioning that limits me. No German shepherd ever promised to be there with me. No home computer ever promised to be a loyal help. Only a person can make a promise, and when you do, you are most free. See, the essence of marriage is not the passion and the feeling which comes and goes and comes and goes. It's that long-term binding commitment. And sometimes I've actually said to people who say, well, he says he wants to live with me, but he doesn't want to marry me. He says he loves me, but he doesn't want to marry me. I say, well, he's probably saying, I don't love you enough to marry you. I don't love you enough to actually lose my independence. I don't love you enough to bind myself to you. I don't love you enough to marry you. So obviously the essence of marriage in the Christian understanding of things is that long-term binding commitment epitomized in a covenant, and it's really important, that piece of paper. It's what takes a consumer relationship and makes it something of intimacy, of stability, of freedom, of beauty. Secondly, I'd like to talk to you about the mission of marriage, not the essence. What's your marriage for? What are you hoping to accomplish through your marriage? I'm afraid an awful lot of people, for an awful lot of people today, marriage is for romance and fun, and maybe kind of merging your net worth to build a somewhat more comfortable life financially and materially. But what is your real goal? The Christian understanding of the mission or goal of marriage is deep character change through deep friendship. Deep character change through deep friendship. Empirical studies show, anecdotal evidence is, and even, I just saw the other day, an eHarmony TV ad confirms that what people are looking for today is what they call a perfectly compatible soulmate. Now, if you ask most people what that means, they usually say, and that's what I mean by when I said I just saw the other day an eHarmony TV ad. It was a guy up there saying, I'm looking for my perfect soulmate, somebody who will accept me just as I am, and I can appreciate her just as she is. And really, the surveys show that when people talk about a perfectly, especially men, by the way, say, I'm looking for somebody who will not change me, and somebody who will accept me just as I am. Now, there's an enormous problem with this. If that's your idea of compatibility, somebody who is low maintenance, doesn't need a lot of change, somebody who's not going to demand a lot of change from you, somebody with whom you already have all this great chemistry, you're going to have a lot of fun with, this is the reason why you're not getting married. Because there really isn't anybody like that out there. You're trying to pose as somebody like that so they'll marry you, but you're not like that either. Now listen. Look, when you get married, you're coming into with all your flaws. Let me just give you a list that I thought about the other day when I was getting ready to come here. You may be a fearful person with a tendency to great anxiety, a proud person with a tendency to be selfish, an inflexible person with a tendency to be demanding, an undisciplined person with a tendency to be unreliable, a perfectionistic person who tends to be too critical of other people, an impatient, irritable person who tends to hold grudges, a cowardly person who tends to twist the truth to look good. And that's just the first 10. I'm not going to go on. Everybody comes into marriage with stuff like that. And you know, your siblings told you about it, your parents told you about it, but you kind of wrote it off. You know, you kind of agree to it because you have to agree to it, but you really don't think it's as serious as people say. And so it's never really sunk in. Your flaws have not sunk in. And then you get married. And now the same flaws that created small problems for you in other relationships create big problems in this relationship, and you can't avoid it because there are no two compatible people. All people come in flawed, and therefore you're fundamentally incompatible. All people come in selfish and self-centered, so everybody's fundamentally incompatible. In fact, marriage will bring out the worst in you. You know, I remember there was a bridge when I was a little kid. There was an old stone bridge where I lived, and there were actually stress fractures, and it was really a bridge in trouble. You couldn't see it until some big truck would come over it, and then the weight would not create the fissures and fractures, but would reveal them. They would get bigger, and you could actually see them. It was very scary and dangerous, and I have no idea why I was standing under the bridge looking at the time. That's probably because I was 10 years old. But the point is, your spouse is a huge Mack truck coming through your life, coming onto your heart, and not creating the problems, but showing the problems that were there. There's huge incompatibilities. And it's not just that you're incompatible because when you come into marriage, but actually you change when you get into marriage. Stanley Hauerwas of Duke University has this very famous and to many people infuriating passage. He says, the assumption is that there is someone just right for us to marry, and that if we look closely enough, we will find that just right person. This assumption overlooks a very crucial aspect to marriage. It fails to appreciate the fact that you always marry the wrong person. We never know whom we marry, we just think we do. Or even if we first marry the right person, just give it a while and he or she will change. For marriage, being the enormous thing it is, means we are not the same person after we've entered it. One of the primary challenges of marriage is learning how to love and care for the stranger to whom you so often find yourself married. Now, if this is true, that you always marry the wrong person, you always marry an incompatible person, and even if the person isn't incompatible when you marry him or her, the person will get incompatible. If this is true, and I dare you to find somebody who's been married more than a few years who will deny that, then three things, and these are the Christian responses to this. First of all, the Christian idea of marriage is based on the biblical idea of human sin. The Bible, the Christian teaching is that all human beings are selfish and sinful. We all want to be our own little gods. That's the biblical view. And therefore, if you are informed by the Christian view of marriage, when you get into marriage, you're not going to be shocked. One of the biggest reasons why you have, the Kim Kardashian thing happen is because people are shocked they haven't been actually prepared. And they think because they've been told that if you have the perfect soulmate, these clashes shouldn't happen. The fact of the matter is you're brought into marriage and you knock the rough edges off of each other, just like two gems put into a gem tumbler knock the rough edges off of each other, because they're moved around and they polish each other. But there's a clash, there's a constructive clash. So the first thing is you embrace that. In fact, you talk about it before you get married. You say this is one of our missions in life, and that is to help each other grow into people that we would never grow into if we weren't married to each other. That's one of your purposes. Secondly, if this is true, then you shouldn't be looking for a finished, this is what Kathy would say if she was here. When you're trying to think about a prospective spouse, don't look for a finished statue. Look for a great block of marble. That's what she would say. And here's what she means by that. You want to fall in love with the person you got in front of you. But just as important, you want to be in love with the person you see that person becoming. There it was. In many ways, when you fall in love with somebody, you're supposed to be, you don't overdo what the person looks like, first of all, because they're not going to stay looking like that. If you want to have the absolute richness of a long-term marriage, don't overdo what they look like, because you're going to change anyway. But don't even look only at their character now. I mean, what you're looking for is you're looking at things like character, courage, wisdom, strength, self-denial, empathy, the ability to understand other people. You're looking for all those things. But what you should every so often get a glimpse, but then it usually goes away, of some great thing this person is becoming. The Christian idea is you fall in love especially with not just the person as he or she is, but the person that he or she is becoming. And the Christian idea is you say, your future excites me, and I want to be there with God making you into that great future person. I mean, the whole idea, sorry, this is a bit of a bridge too far, I imagine, for some who are listening to me, but I mean, the Christian idea is that someday, instead of standing in front of, the priest or the pastor or the rabbi or all that, when you go up there to get married, someday you're standing before the throne in heaven, and you're now fully everything that God wants you to be, and you look at each other and you say, I always knew you could be like this. I always saw glimpses of it, and now look at you. And to know I was part of that process. I know, listen, this is part of the mission of marriage. It's falling in love not just with the person as they are, but the person as they're going to be. And what that means then, if you're going to be in a relationship, here's the last thing about this mission idea. The mission of marriage, if it's really true that no two people are compatible, you're always incompatible, you need to embrace that incompatibility, you expect the conflict. Secondly, you fall in love not just with a person who's perfect now, but a person that you see the person becoming. Great raw material, etc. You expect there to be changes. But lastly, you should be looking for somebody who is or could be your best friend. See, if that's the purpose of marriage, deep character change through deep friendship, then you're looking for somebody who could be your most trusted counselor and your best friend, even if the person isn't yet. See, here's what really happens is you're a single person, you walk in a room of other singles, let's say there's 10 other people there. You immediately, by looking at them, eliminate 7. You know you do. It's all on the basis of looks and polish. And then you go to the 3 that you think, there could be some chemistry here. And then, probably your best candidate for somebody who could be a lifelong friend partner, you just eliminated it, didn't make your first cut. You should be looking for somebody who can be your best partner, and I guess your best friend. And maybe I should just end this point saying this. Somebody's going to say, so you're just saying sexual chemistry and attraction means nothing? Oh, no, I'm not saying that at all. But I want you to think of it this. Friendship does not flow out of great sexual chemistry. Sexual chemistry grows out of terrific friendship. You know why? There's nothing more sexy than knowing that somebody you admire to the skies admires you. The praise of the praiseworthy is above all rewards. It's when somebody that you admire to the sky thinks you're incredible. There's nothing more powerfully sexy than that. So, do the friendship and the sexual chemistry, a lasting sexual chemistry, will be there. So the sexual chemistry flows out of the friendship, not the friendship out of the sexual chemistry. Listen, when I first kissed my wife, and I don't mean as my wife, I mean the very first time I went out with Kathy, we spent some time together, this is before we were married, and I kissed her. What electricity. Now, somebody's going to say, do you get that same electricity now when you kiss her 35, 37 years later that you did then? I said, no, of course not. I said, isn't that a shame? I said, no. When I look back, I know the incredible thrill I got the first time I held her hand and she squeezed it back, the first time I kissed her and she kissed me back. It was ego. I wasn't loving her. I had no idea who she was, really. I was in love with the idea this girl likes me. In other words, she likes me. It seems like sexual love. It's really ego. It's a rush. It's a rush to your head. I would never, ever want to go back to the shallowness of the feeling I had the first time I kissed her. I would never give that up. You know, the difference between kissing her then and kissing her now is the difference between a deep river that makes no noise, that's now, and a babbling brook that made a lot of noise, but it was like 1 inch deep. Lastly, the secret of marriage. The secret of marriage, and then the secret of the secret, okay? The secret of marriage is to be able to love your spouse during seasons in which you're getting very little, if any, love back. I've already referred to that a little bit with the Ulysses Mass thing, but the fact is that there are going to be times in your married life. This will be true for you too, as well. But I'm doing this from your point of view. There will be times in which your spouse is sick. There'll be times in which your spouse is discouraged. There'll be times in which your spouse is sort of absorbed in his or her problems, and during those times, it is absolutely critical when you're actually not, the person's not really serving you much, the person's not really noticing you, not being attentive to you, the person's just attentive to themselves because they're absorbed in their issues and problems. It's extremely important during those times to be able to keep on giving love even when you're not getting much love back. However, that takes a source of love from outside. You can give out a lot of money over here. You can give a lot of love to your spouse, even in those hard times, if you're really getting an enormous amount of love from somewhere else. Now, the only possible way to get a source of love that strong without being unfaithful to your spouse is to have a relationship with God. That's the Christian idea. If God's love is a reality to you, then you actually can get through those periods of time. You're like a philanthropist. If God's love is a reality to you, you don't melt down when your spouse isn't loving you. You don't melt down and go freak out, as you will if your spouse is the main source of love income. If your spouse is the main source of love income, you will freak out when your spouse goes through those dry periods and is not giving you anything. But if God is the main source of your love income, then you can handle it, and you can stick to it, and you can get through it, and you can keep tied to the mast, as it were, until you come to your senses. It all comes from this verse in Ephesians chapter 5, where Paul talks to husbands and wives and says, love one another as Christ loved the church and gave himself. When Jesus was on the cross, he looks down at all the people who are betraying him, and they're denying him, and they're forsaking him. And in one of the great acts of love in the history of the world, he just stayed. He didn't leave. And he didn't love us because we were lovely. He loved us to make us lovely. And that is the pattern and the paragon and the paradigm for the Christian idea of marriage. So I'm going to stop there. There's always more to say, but I understand